ago that Deebo Samuel, one of the wide receivers on the trade block, did indeed get traded to the Washington Commanders. The Houston Texans were interested per se on him, depending on how true the rumors are or not. There is another guy the Texans could be looking, maybe in the NFC, that I propose right now. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of TheLead Houston, where it's all Houston all the time. You won't find anybody with more passion speaking about your favorite Houston sports teams than this guy right here. Astros, Rockets, Texans. I try to do it all. So go down in the comment section. Let me know how, Texans fans, would you feel about my proposal. And the proposal here is to trade for a legitimate growing star at the wide receiver position, somebody that is still young. And yes, there is some cons to this individual, and we will get to those cons in just a minute. But to me, a big fish wide receiver that could be relatively cheap in terms of the trade value is no other than the man on the thumbnail you saw right there in the title, Chris Olave. We know Chris Olave, the former Ohio State wide receiver, his connection to CJ Stroud. CJ himself has called him a top 10 wide receiver and debatably threw him in the top 5 conversation. Olave has done pretty well in his early career, only 3 years in the NFL, but this previous year ended up getting hurt. And I don't know what was up with this previous year. Obviously, Derek Carr got hurt early for the Saints, but Olave was on pace to having maybe his worst year in the NFL so far, ending up with 32 catches, 400 yards, and a goose egg for a touchdown. That is not comparable to the previous 2 years where we saw Olave really outshine the wide receiver groups and was one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. The kid is still young as hell. And again, there's continuity there between him and CJ Stroud. I would be extremely interested in this move. I would at least have the conversation. That's the beginning point right there. You got to have this conversation because it's obvious that the Texans are going to be looking at some sort of way to try to improve the wide receiver group. And I think Chris Olave could be a big addition to this team. When you saw him his first 2 years, you're looking at a guy that had over 70 catches his first 2 years, back-to-back 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns his rookie year, 5 touchdowns his sophomore year, 87 catches his sophomore year. He put out some really good numbers. And again, middling quarterback play, right? Like the quarterbacks he had was not so hot. And Olave, we know with CJ Stroud, I feel like that productivity and those numbers can go all the way up. Do the Houston Texans want to trade for Chris Olave? Yeah, I would think they would keep it in mind, but I think the biggest con and the biggest negative when I do this video is that Chris Olave is going to be looking for an extension. And this is going to be entering his 4th year in the NFL. That extension is going to be looming. I don't know what he's looking at in terms of his value on the contract. I would think, considering his first 2 years, that the number could be pretty high. I don't know where he would rank himself in terms of the wide receiver market. You've already paid a relatively cheap deal for Nico Collins. I would be extremely interested in what Chris Olave would be looking at, have those conversations, call those New Orleans, Louisiana area code and begin the conversation immediately. The kid is a bona fide stud, and you bring him here with CJ Nick Caley's new offense. You got yourself a great wide receiver duo with Nico Collins and Chris Olave, and it really pushes the envelope for this offense. The only other con I do have for Chris Olave is he's had 5 concussions in the past 3 years. That is something to keep an eye on. And it's something when it comes to the bargaining table about contract extensions. You know, you're going to look at every little thing to try to save some money if you're the Texans or any team that tries to trade for this guy. When you look at the Saints, they're in a rebuild. Let's be real. The team is so confusing. They're kind of like the black guy of the NFL. They've had the NFL owner with some allegations thrown his way that weren't so hot. the Saints went out and hired Kellen Moore. I don't know how much success Kellen Moore is supposed to have, but it doesn't feel very good right now. And the future is very murky for the New Orleans Saints. Now, Chris Olave could want to still be there. He's a very young wide receiver. It's not like he's a veteran. He could be going through the rebuild with them and then look at the good side of it if a goal goes well and he's there for the in his prime for the future of their rebuild. Who knows? But if I am the Houston Texans, if I am Nick Caserio, and if I am a Texan fan, I would want the Texans to explore and search through every wide receiver that is available on the trade block. I would even ask people that I know wouldn't even be on the trade block. The Texans have to be going through this every stone unturned kind of attitude, and Chris Olave would be, again, a big fish for this Houston Texans team. And I think it could come at a relatively cheap price. I'm thinking, I want to say a third round pick for him. Like, that wouldn't be so bad. I'm for real. I would give up a third round pick immediately for Chris Olave. I could work those concussions against him. I could work the injury against him. Overall, though, Olave is a stud. The Saints are going to try to get everything they are going to get from him if they do trade him. I would love to see the Texans try to harp in on this and try to swoop a young rising star away from a rebuilding, meddling team. Bring him over here with CJ Stroud, Nick Caley, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon and company. Sounds like a damn good offense that could be brewing here in Htown. As always, guys, go Astros, go Rockets, go Texans. You have a blessed day.